Cool. Okay, we're live. So welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Cool Story Bro. Today I've got with me Maritz, Emil, Petter, and Lynn. And today the topic is all around money, energy, and cryptocurrency. So I want to try and frame it a little bit first for people who are maybe new to cryptocurrencies and how to kind of think about money and some of these new emerging forms of money like cryptocurrencies that are really going to disrupt, I think, the forms of money that we've had for, hundreds of years. So just a bit of background, I guess, I got into cryptocurrency about 2014, 15, and Bitcoin's been around for about 10 years now, since 2009. So before we get into crypto, is like the history of money. If you look at like how money systems work, they're very centrally controlled today. We have central banks. These central banks have been around for 300 years or more. And, if you look back at the history of empires, there's always kind of been a central entity controlling the currency and the issuance of money. And if you have that kind of control and everyone has to use your currency, you basically have a lot of power, and you can run empires, and you can starve people, and you can, control where money flows. And so it's all been a big power and control game. And I think the education about what money is deliberately kind of dumbed down, so people don't really ask too many questions like, is this a fair system of money? How am I being rewarded for my time and my labor? And really all it is like a sort of shared social construct. Like if people believe something is money for long enough, it kind of becomes money. And so, gold's been around for thousands of years. People used to use seashells, all kinds of stuff at different points. And there's different qualities of money which kind of makes it easier to believe it's money. So if it's scarce in some degree, all these kind of characteristics, if it's fungible. So I don't want to get too much into like the nerdy monetary economics of it, but definitely to kind of say that we've all been believing that, cash is money essentially for 300 years. And it's not really been backed by anything since it was depegged from gold. So the US has kind of been the latest world reserve currency. Before that, it was the British. And typically as empires kind of rise and fall, you get this kind of expansion, and the currency and the spending goes out of control, basically, which then devalues the currency. So the British had that sort of episode leading up to the World War. And then after World War II, US kind of took over the mantle and became the sort of lead currency, because they had the most manufacturing after the war, and they rebuilt the whole global economy. Basically, they lent all the credit to Europe, and so all of Europe started using dollars and loans, in dollars, US dollars, to rebuild the economy. So that's kind of where we've been for the last sort of 70, 80 years. And like I said, if you control the dollar, if you control the issuance of that currency, it gives you a lot of power. So America as a military empire has just grown and grown and grown. And now they're kind of in the same situation where they've expanded and just keep expanding, and kind of like, their trade partners and allies are sort of frustrated to some degree. So there's a lot of things going behind the scenes politically, which I think is leading to a lot of change with the currency. But basically the trust and the confidence globally is kind of breaking down, and people don't really trust the US to be like a neutral, sort of independent, manager of this reserve currency. And then on top of that, you have the central banks, obviously how they kind of work together behind the scenes. So you have the central banks and, the Fed in America, Bank of England, Bank of Japan, Bank of China, and most of these collude together or cooperate together. It's like a cartel, to kind of control the price of stuff. Just like OPEC is a mafia for controlling the price of oil, you have similar kind of cartel mechanisms for the price of money and how trade is done. And if you essentially force people into using structures, because if you don't use these structures, we're going to invade you or blow you up or whatever. Like there's a lot of coercive ways of making sure people use these currencies. You get paid in this currency, you pay tax in this currency, you have to buy from the shops in this currency. So all those mechanisms kind of keep people inside a sort of closed loop system. And in that system, it's very easy to sort of manage where money goes. And essentially what's been happening since 2008 is that, the banks had a huge crisis where they were just kind of lending and lending, taking on a lot of risk. And then when the economy contracted, they weren't able to obviously absorb the losses, and so the governments had to come in and bail them out. And so there's a big sort of confidence crisis of, the banks are privatizing all the gains, and now they're socializing all the losses, because the taxpayers are basically taking a hit, because all this debt that the government is using to bail out the banks is coming from taxpayers. And this is kind of how this cartel mafia is kind of basically robbing people blind by devaluing currency. So that's kind of my, I guess, idea or story about it. I'm sure there's different ways of telling the story, but I'm trying to keep it short, I guess, to the point. And so with all these things going on since 2008, Actually, since that crisis was obviously when Bitcoin was released in 2009, kind of as a response to that, because certain people probably saw where this was going, that if you have a closed loop system, it becomes very tyrannical and there's no sort of escape outside of that system. So if you have alternative forms of energy and they can't be censored, then that's the key thing, because anytime a new form of money pops up, or let's say, for example, even Iraq wants to sell their oil in euros instead of dollars, I mean, that country gets wiped out. Anytime a country kind of steps outside of the agreed rules, it's too easy to sort of censor it or restrict it. So you need a form of money which is kind of free and uncensorable, and that's pretty much what blockchain is, because it's very, very hard to censor it. And especially the way it's kind of grown from a very grassroots level. Now it's just got so much power behind it in terms of network effects, computing power, securing the blockchain. It's almost impossible for any one government to try and take it down. You can't obviously turn off the internet. Even if you do that now, there's other pathways for blockchain. It can run over ham radio and sort of all sorts of technology. So it's just a very uncensorable form of money, and it's very transparent because people can see how many coins are being issued and minted, and the sort of pre-agreed rules of what we consider to be money, or what I was saying earlier about things that are scarce and fungible. Bitcoin has those characteristics, so you can think of it kind of like a digital gold. And that's obviously really popular for people who want to move money around, maybe get it out of their country, where they're worried about their country or their government, devaluing the currency, like we kind of saw with China. That was one of the big reasons we had a Bitcoin boom, was Chinese trying to get their money out of the Chinese yuan before the government devalues it, because again, currencies are kind of devalued as a sort of a trade mechanism to become more competitive as an exporter. So I don't want to go too nerdy into why all this stuff's happening, but basically the systems of trade are screwing people because we don't have a form of money we can agree on, and we can't store our labor without some entity coming along and kind of screwing with it. And this is just something that's been going on for cycles and cycles. It's not the first time it's happened, but you have these currencies that rise and fall, and then you try and have a better form of money or a different empire. And we're kind of going through that transition now, where we've had this world reserve currency, the US dollar, and now we're sort of, people are questioning it, and obviously, the worth of the US dollar is only how many people are willing to use it and trade with it. It's actually very interesting. Next week, I think on 2nd of May, Donald Trump's basically had these waivers in place for countries that want to buy oil from Iran. And so he's basically saying from the 2nd of May, there's no more waivers, and that if you buy oil from Iran, they're going to have sanctions placed on you by the US. So basically the US is using their currency and their sort of their infrastructure as a sort of sanctions, and say, we'll cut you out of the system if you buy oil from Iran. And obviously US is now the biggest oil exporter in the world, so they're basically like a mafia, right? They're trying to control supply and demand and make sure that people have to buy oil from the US and not from Iran. So there's all kinds of things going on politically, and obviously China and Russia and all these countries don't like it. So there's going to be at some point a sort of breakdown in that process of how much people are willing to be bullied, and to what force the US can kind of project that force to make that happen. And that's just something that's going on for years and years. But now it's kind of feel like it's coming to a flashpoint, because obviously China's very big economically, Russia's very big militarily. You can't have the same hegemony that the US has kind of been very comfortable with since World War II. So all that being said, why do we need to know about this, and what is useful for us to kind of understand and take away? If you think about money as sort of an abstraction of your labor, right? So you put in your time, you're investing your time every day. Either you go to work, or you're building a business, or you're trying to add some value to the world somewhere, and you're trying to, instead of bartering, no one has necessarily got exactly what you need. Like, I might need to buy something today, but I needed something, like a currency to do that. It's like a middle ground. So we have to have some agreed sort of value that we can use and hold our value in, and something that the government's not going to be able to sort of devalue or just waste with negative interest rates and all kinds of crazy ideas coming from the central banks now. So without that dollar in place, without those fiat currencies in place that aren't backed by anything, obviously people might revert to gold or silver as sort of older forms of money. But again, those things aren't very useful in a global trade, because how are you going to ship physical bars of gold and silver around? And if you do it digitally, you still have the problem of like a counterpart, where you're putting your gold and silver into custody. You have to trust that bank, that person is holding that gold for you. They're not lending and leasing it out, which we've seen is happening all the time. So there's huge issues basically with those custodians, with those counterparties in the traditional banking system, where there's just not much trust and transparency. And the great thing about blockchain and cryptocurrency is you don't need a lot of those custodians and counterparties in the system. You can pretty much trade peer-to-peer. The blockchain is a sort of independent ledger that everyone can see and trust. And so you're taking out those middlemen, those counterparties that introduce risk. And obviously, the banks have basically used that to their advantage over the years. And again, siphon off huge amounts of wealth out of the economy. So with a better form of money. It's a matter of time before people figure it out. Okay, I am going to, be rewarded if I put money into this. It's going to hold its value better than if I put it into currencies, like, fiat currencies that aren't backed by anything. And obviously since 2009, Bitcoin's gone from like a few cents to, $20,000 and now back down to about $4,000 or $5,000. So in terms of multiples, probably nothing has grown in terms of value as quickly in the last 10 years as Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, because the number of people coming into it is just obviously driving the network effect and driving the demand. So this has just been fascinating for me to kind of see how it unfolds. Like I was working in the banks in London in 2009 when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and I was working in Barclays at the time and watching these guys carry their boxes, and like I was kind of freaking out because obviously London is the center of global finance, and if banks collapse, then there's not going to be many jobs around. So I didn't really understand much at that point about cryptocurrency. It was very new back then, but I slowly sort of got into the idea of, okay, there's got to be better forms of money. What else is out there? And just kind of researching the topic more and the history of money allows you to kind of see opportunity when it comes. And then when I finally, got into crypto seriously enough, I was like, okay, this is definitely part of the solution to like a lot of the problems that I've been researching and studying. So that's when I really got more interested into it. And I didn't really invest actively till 2014, 2015, when I started just putting bits in just to kind of see how it works, right? Just to, when you had some skin in the game, when you actually put some energy into something, you pay attention to it a lot more. You just start to follow it. You start to see how the wallets work, how the technology works. You really invested in it, I guess more emotionally, or your skin is in the game. So that for me was really interesting because I started to learn much quicker once I started doing that. And then I got into crypto pretty much full time a couple of years ago when everything really went really crazy, and I decided to stop what else I was doing and just study this and really get into it and see. Because when new forms of money emerge, you kind of have this once in a lifetime transition where a huge amount of wealth is moving from a certain type of asset class to another asset class. And I think we're still like really, really early in that. If you look at like the market cap of these asset classes, you have like gold is 8 trillion. Bitcoin right now is like 70 billion or something. It's, it's tiny. And then you have real estate is like 200 trillion. Global bonds like government debt is 200 trillion or more. And so compared to those asset classes that have been growing for 70, 80 years, like I said, since, World War II, and that whole infrastructure of collateral that's based around the dollar, there's so much money parked in there that's kind of losing value, and people don't know where to put it. So people are kind of obviously trying to put it into real estate, hard assets, anything they think will hold value. But a lot of these things aren't very liquid either. And so, and they're not maybe, they're not uncensorable and safe from seizure and things like that and confiscation. So even gold, they confiscated gold in America back when they sort of revalued the currency, because they obviously needed to control the supply and demand. And I think the same thing's happening again, is that the central bank's kind of buying up all the gold in anticipation of using that as sort of a standard to rebase the currency or repeg and have some new sort of standard. So it'd be interesting to see how this all plays out, but I think that cryptocurrency is maybe a way of just stepping outside of that closed loop system I was talking about, and maybe looking at other forms of energy and how to abstract energy. So the basic concept with Bitcoin is proof of work, is how that sort of algorithm is, that computation works. It takes a certain amount of computational power, and those computers have to be running, and they take energy, and so that's called proof of work. And so I'm not going to get too nerdy, but basically you can think of it just like gold, and that gold takes a certain amount of energy to extract it out of the ground, refine it, store it back in a bank in a vault somewhere. And that is sort of a hard cost of energy, of labor, that people agree has value and has scarcity. So you can think of Bitcoin much the same way. It takes a certain amount of energy to extract it, with power. All these Bitcoin miners are running around the world. That's probably the biggest computing network in the world now in terms of like raw power. So that is sort of very hard cost that people are investing in, that gives it a sort of a floor of value, if you like. And that's a hard cost that, gives the currency value. If there's no cost to it, like then it really means nothing, right? Because anyone can just invent it or print it. And we've kind of seen a lot of altcoins or scam coins, shit coins that are trying to copy Bitcoin, but they don't really have those fundamentals, and they haven't got the network effects. They're just trying to leverage off the sort of brand or the idea of cryptocurrency. And so again, like there's probably a lot of use cases of blockchain and cryptocurrency that go beyond pure currency as money. Like you can think of Bitcoin maybe as like a pure currency, but you have Ethereum that is sort of programmable money, and it does other things that Bitcoin can't do. So I don't know how deep you want to get into all these different use cases. And you have things like Holochain and things that are sort of beyond typical blockchain consensus models, which are maybe more efficient. And some people say blockchain is just the first sort of generation of this type of technology, and it's going to be obsolete soon or whatever. So there's different arguments around what that is in terms of what what these emerging forms of money are going to look like in 5-10 years, because it's also new. Gold's been around for thousands of years. We can pretty much say it's going to be around still in 5-10 years, but we don't know the same with cryptocurrency because it's still all very new forms of money. But yeah, I definitely want to open it up to you guys to get your thoughts on it. I know we're all pretty active in the crypto space, but maybe how people can start thinking about this, just in terms of maybe some basic education or basic ideas about the history of money. And then in terms of like our individual time, how we're investing our time into like savings or wealth. Because if you have a nice buffer, let's say you have a year's worth of savings or 10 years worth of savings, the amount of sovereignty that really gives you is quite powerful, because you can be very picky about what you invest your time into. You're not just trying to pay the bills or pay the mortgage. And I think that's a real trap of the money system, is that there's a certain scarcity built into it. It's very hard to accumulate meaningful wealth that doesn't get sort of drained away by the system of inflation and debasement. And so I think that's what I've been looking into, is like, what are the forms of money that I can sort of build and control in a more sovereign way that lets me build up that buffer. Because if I have, like I said, a year's worth of savings or 10 years worth of savings, I'm going to make very different decisions day to day, and I'm probably going to be out of that scarcity trap. And I think that's where a lot of people are stuck today. So it's very, like, I think it's personally very hard to step outside of that system. I'm going to stop in a minute, don't worry, but I'm just brain dumping here. I think it's very hard to step outside of that system if you don't have a sovereign form of money, because at some point, the government could just freeze your bank account or just call you a terrorist or whatever number of things, right? And that all that money you thought you accumulated actually was totally not yours. It's just some digits in a bank somewhere. So I'll slow down a bit now, but that's my thoughts on it. And so, yeah, I love this topic because I feel it's very empowering when you really get into it, finding a way to store your wealth. So it's your wealth, and actually you control it, you manage it. No one can really take it away from you as long as you're kind of smart with security and stuff. And so the traditional risk vectors of governments and confiscation and taxes and seizure, it doesn't really apply. And the fact we live in a global world now is so interesting, because I sort of travel all over the world. I don't really live in one country. I don't even do business in one country. So I don't see why I should be forced to put money into one currency or one silly, idea when there's global currencies now kind of emerging. And I think that's also a phenomenon of globalization, is that these cryptocurrencies are global currencies, not national currencies. So with all that said, I could talk for hours, but I'm going to open up to you guys. If you have any thoughts or questions or ideas on what I've just thrown out there about how we can think about this, and maybe practical stuff for people to think about.
I'd be curious to get everybody's sort of experience with cryptocurrency so far, and what their understanding is, to sort of get a temperature view in a sense, and then to see where we can like bridge understanding or build up a shared map.
Cool. Well, I've just brain dumped, so maybe Moritz, you wanted to go first, so just give like a quick intro, and then the other guys can do the same.
Sounds good. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, my work pretty much takes place in crypto primarily right now. I've been with a crypto project called Holo and Holochain for about a year now, and been doing project work with them, and also full-time and part-time work. And I heard of Bitcoin for the first time in 2013, when it was just going through one of those upward cycles from 200 to 600 in 3 weeks. And it was exactly the time where I was waiting for my Bitstamp account to finally get approved. And I was like, damn it, like already 3 times missed out. And it was one of those like experiences that makes you really think what money is like and how money can behave, and that it brings it down to an experiential level, rather than sort of this thing in the background of your mind that you don't really, like, it's always a present, but you don't experience it as something that has like, that you need to understand very well. And so when I saw Bitcoin just shoot through the roof, it was like, oh wow, like how can something like this happen? That made me curious about how it works, what money is, whether there is such a thing as digital currency, and whether it is the same as money, or whether it has the same features. And so I started diving down into it, also in concert with my generalized interest in sort of heterodox economic theories, like the whole Keynesian stuff that we're exposed to in universities and in the mainstream media is just so inadequate to help us understand how the world works economically. And so I went down to anarchist economics and to Austrian economics, and to all of those sort of more, I don't know, in some sense, sane economics, that don't think that you can produce something from nothing, that there's always a cost attached to anything that you do. And so I think Bitcoin definitely embodies that kind of principle. Like it's this idea of okay, we have to expend some energy to make something worthwhile. And so there is a better understanding of value there. And it sort of goes, I mean, it was conceived of as a project of sidestepping the legacy financial system, and to provide people who are interested in having sound money an alternative to using the banks and being outside of sort of captured infrastructure that you cannot possibly have any hope of changing yourself, be that through political action or your individual agency. And so Bitcoin sort of came around and provide that new playing field in a sense. And it took some time for people to pick up on it. But I mean, if you think of how little time has actually passed with Bitcoin being around, like now it's about 10 years, it's quite astonishing how far it has come so far. And that if you really think about it, it's probably going to go much farther. And not just in terms of the dollar value rising upwards, because I think that's actually the least interesting part of it, even though of course it can definitely make your fortune if you know how to do that. But just the capacity to transact value over the internet directly rather than through any particular institution is definitely a crucial innovation that I think we can still take further. And I am sort of in that camp of crypto believers that think Bitcoin was great as the starting point, but will not be the way that it's built currently, will not be the way that it's going to be carried forth into the future, because it made some certain technological or architectural choices that made sense when it was the only way to solve it. Basically Bitcoin solved a computer science problem not through computer science innovation, but through economic innovation, in the sense that the problem with digital money so far has always been, how do you prevent double spending? How do you prevent people from spending the same money twice? And so in the digital sphere, because every data you can just copy it, you don't want to have people participating in the financial system to have the ability to just double click on their bank account and like copy paste, and then spend it with multiple people at the same time. And so Bitcoin solved that by basically having everybody in the entire network hold on to the entirety of the data set of transactions that exist, and then to string the updates to that data set to each other in blocks. And that's basically what the blockchain is. Like it's a database structure that updates itself in blocks, and that requires everybody who participates in it to hold virtually all of that data. And I think it's now at, I don't know, 210 gigabytes or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. And so it is only growing. Like it isn't really pruning. And so, but the way that they solve the problem of double spending is by having everybody hold on to that same data set, and then to make it costly to run attacks on it by basically having to expend a lot of computational power to try to solve puzzles and be the one who updates the chain. And you would have to have more than 50% of the hash power, so the computing power in the whole network, which is just ginormous at this point, in order to basically run an attack on it. And so it made it economically infeasible to attack the thing. Except it's not exactly true. There is actually a way to attack it, and especially nation states or even larger institutions than that have the capacity to do that, because they have access to incredible amounts of cheap energy. And so there are ways to attack the Bitcoin network if you have free energy, basically. And so that's another reason why I don't think that Bitcoin will be, like the way it's built right now, will be the way forward, because it didn't solve the fundamental computer science problem. It solved through an economic problem, and the ones with the most economic power will have the capacity to change it if they wanted to. And so that's one thing. And so actually the project that I'm involved in, Holochain and Holo, we have solved that computer science problem, I would sort of dare to say, in the sense that we didn't make it that economically infeasible to change the data that's already there, but instead what we did is we start from, we reorient the entire data thing from data is first and in the middle, and like everybody is looking at the same history. Instead, it's all about agent-centricity. And like we're using two different technologies that have already been proven to work, like Git style hash chains and torrent-like distributed hash tables to construct a system where everybody has the updates that are happening that are relevant to them on their own device to their own chain. And then the ones that are relevant to the network of the app that they're a part of get shared to the one that they're transacting with, and they're sort of mutually signing each other's entries. And then these entries also get validated by a particular set of people or nodes in the network that do validation for them. And so I won't go into details because I don't want to get too nerdy and too sort of have people turn off, but I think we've solved that computer science problem. And so based on that simple shift of sort of philosophical shift from data centricity to agent centricity, I think we are now at a point where our system is at least 10,000 times faster, if not 1,000,000 times. At least that was in the test benchmarks that we've done. And you could probably pretty trivially re-implement Bitcoin in our system and save on all that cost of energy, actually. And I think there's one sort of thing that I see in the Bitcoin maximalist circles that is just abhorrent to me, because they should know better, which is this sort of labor theory of value. Like, if something has cost something, it must have value. Like, dude, like this is the exact opposite of what Austrian economics tells you, that something doesn't have value because you've expended energy for it. Something has value because people find a use for it, and they are willing to give you something else in return for it. So it's subjective value theory. And so the stupidity of thinking that the labor theory of value holds in the case of Bitcoin, I think is quite astonishing.
That's it's interesting. I definitely I like Holochain. I think we could get into specific discussions about architectures and stuff, but it's probably a bit too nerdy for people. But definitely worth going out there and looking at that for yourself. Like, there's not just obviously one type of coin or chain or technology, and I think maybe Bitcoin is a pure currency, whereas Holochain is more of a distributed computing style technology. So there's just different use cases. Again, Holochain can do things Bitcoin can't do right now. So that's kind of where tech is always evolving. And if you look at how the internet evolved, there was many layers always coming out, right? And so the companies that first came out in the first tech boom aren't the ones that are around now at all. So that's just kind of how technology matures and evolves. I guess in terms of keeping the discussion, just to start with, at least sort of practical around how people can think about this and how to use it and engage with it, or maybe just to kind of educate themselves on sort of money and the decisions, the choices they're making every day. Like you said at the beginning, where it's, we don't really think about this very in detail. Like, this is something we just understand. Yes, we have to make money to pay the bills, and this is the system we're born into, and we don't really question it. Is this the most efficient system, or what other systems are out there? And I think obviously currencies that are failing right now, like in Venezuela and Turkey and certain places, Argentina, those countries, those people in those countries are forced to use cryptocurrency because their own currencies just don't hold value day to day. So it's a much more immediate issue for them that they have to educate and understand how these things work. Whereas for us, most of us, where we're living, the currencies are not that unstable. And so from us, it's more of a speculation and sort of trying to predict the future of where things are going to go and then take advantage of that, right? So we're not at the end of that sort of curve. So that adoption curve that's happening, you're going to go from maybe 1% of people owning crypto to 3% to 5 to 10 to eventually, a lot of the currencies and business and trade, global trade, could be settled on blockchain and cryptocurrency. So it's, where are we in that adoption curve? How important is it for me to get kind of involved? And then in terms of like the speculative element, I think that's also quite dangerous for people because they tend to get suckered in when everything's on the news. And typically when you see stuff on the news, it's already very late in that particular cycle, right? So we have a lot of boom bust cycles with Bitcoin and crypto. And if you're hearing about it from your friends and on the news and everywhere else, then the chances are it's already gone up a lot from wherever it started climbing. And there's going to be a big correction because any new form of money is just really volatile. And you saw that with the tech stocks, with the internet stocks, you had Amazon was down 96% or something at one point, right? And now it's obviously up many multiples from there. So every new emerging tech is going to have this issue. And I think, especially when it comes to money, people tend to not understand the risks because they're not educated about money or investment. And so it's a bit of a tricky conversation to get into with investment, and risk tolerance is different for everyone. But I would say this is probably something definitely worth educating yourself about. And if you're putting anywhere from 1 to 5% of your savings in, it's not going to lose sleep over at night. It's not going to kill you if it goes to zero. But if Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is the next whatever big thing, that alone could help you kind of survive that transition instead of having all your money in one currency, in one country, in one bank. I freaked out when I saw my money was in British pounds, and the British pound was just spending billions on the banks, and pretty much since I pulled my money out 10 years ago, British pounds collapsed against most currencies. So it's definitely lost value if you're ever planning to use that money outside of that current country. And you got to think about those things a bit ahead of time, because once it's already happening, it gets harder and harder to move your money around. Now we have like $10,000 cash limit transactions on withdrawals and moving money around. So already the capital controls, and it's even worse in other countries, obviously like China and stuff. Now we're kind of seeing how much this money is actually yours and how much of it is just a sort of story or a fiction. Yes, this is your money, but you can only touch this much of it at once. I think that's one of the biggest sort of bullshit stories that's unraveling at the moment. And when banks fail, like in Cyprus and Greece, you can't even get your money out. 60 euros a day, that's all that's yours. Good luck. You spend your whole life trying to accumulate and save value, and then you're sort of, the rug's pulled under from you. That's going to happen to a lot of people, basically, I think, in the next few years. So we don't have to get into like our personal savings and investment strategies, how much money we have in crypto. Like, it's all very personal. I kind of understand that, and it's very emerging. But I don't know if Emil, if you had anything you want to share, like philosophically, on how you look at crypto, or just how money's changing, that kind of stuff. How is it useful for you to look at it?
Yeah, I would love to do that, because I've been spending obviously a lot of time outside the last few days, and my mind is a little other places than very left brain things. But one thing I can share is definitely some fundamentals that I heard many times before, many years ago, but I never really understood it when people said that the whole idea about being rich and abundance and all these things, it's a mindset. And I didn't understand it at the time, but it really is true how it works. If we have the mindset of being abundant and having everything and being rich and investing in good things, and the outcome will follow that mindset. And it's really, really simple, because we control our own reality. So by putting ourselves in like we talked about in all the other episodes, like we're always living in the scarcity, and the money system that we have already now in the fiat world, it is built on scarcity. That's basically what everyone is, in the vibe of scarcity all the time by using that money system. But if we kind of step out of that and try to be in the mindset of abundance, then whether that means to scale down on your house, buy a smaller house, or rent a smaller house, or buy a cheaper groceries, or whatever it is, that makes you feel abundant, that makes you feel like you have something over all the time, instead of always being behind on the bills, it really makes a difference in your everyday life. And it's just really, really beautiful how everything changes from that mindset of being at peace and feeling like you have everything you need. Then you also have everything you need, which is just very, very interesting. And I think that works pretty well with crypto as well. If you manage to save up a little bit in your everyday life and put it away in something that's not controlled by banks and governments and everywhere, and the good thing about crypto is you completely own everything yourself. It's completely your responsibility to make sure that your money is safe and that you keep track of all the keys and the private keys and all this. So you're 100% your own bank, which is super, super cool and gives you so much sovereignty. So whether the value of the coins you invested in increase or rise, that's different, but you definitely own the responsibility 100% yourself, which is really, really cool. And yeah, I think that was just what I wanted to share now.
Cool, thanks. Lynn, go over to you.
Yes, as I'll give a bit of more origin story, because Emil's got me paranoid now. Yeah, so one of those, you can hear me, guys, right?
Yeah.
Or stop checking. So I actually, when I think about it, I was, I guess, pretty early, 2011, when I first put any money into crypto. But it's not a happy ever after story, as they never are, right? It was via Bitstamp, and I think about it, I don't even know how I managed to navigate that user interface. Like, it was horrible. It was terrible. I don't know what made me feel confident enough to put any of my money into it. So, but again, it's like you're saying, put such small amounts that it just does not, you won't lose sleep over it. And I mean, from my family background, you know, we were not say poor or anything like that, but I was very conscious of the importance of money and, you know, stuff like that, and how it can, you know, feed you and keep you water, keep you roof over your head. And yeah, so got in, but of course it was only at the very, very top, you know, standard, you know, undisciplined trader's mind. And as it started going down, I sold, and then a couple of weeks later, I was, you know, that sort of relationship. Then walked away, was aware of it, heard stuff, but, you know, it wasn't until I think I've seen 2016, I think Mike was starting to post things about Veritasium. I remember as like the first alt that I have ever heard of. When the charismatic leader Reggie Middleton, like him or
He's a
loathe
martial
him.
arts guy. That's why you liked him.
Oh really? You know what? I didn't even realize that. I can see he's got that kung fu master voice and vibe going on with his face. Like, you know, what's going on? But one thing I really kind of obviously seeing Mike's bits on it and also looking into it. There was a quote that Reggie Middleton used all the time. I don't know if it's his. If it is, it's brilliant. But it really affects me, you know, like economically leaning. I'm far more, say, libertarian, Austrian economic favouring sort of chap, you know. But there's a phrase which said, money, like, you know, so he'll ask someone, "What is money? And what do you think money is?" And you know, there's people have all the different ideas, and I'm not saying any of them are wrong, but the one that I think resonated most with me is that money is a proxy for labour, and that, though it's like 6 words, it has far-reaching meaning. I think even what we talk about on a weekly basis, where it's been about you know, how you're using your time, your energy, things you want, how you all money is paying for someone else's service. Maybe not right there and then, but something that someone spent time growing a crop for you to be able to eat. Someone's helped put together the infrastructure, use their brain to work out a theory, let's say, to get electricity and power grids going. All these things that we were paying for other human, paying for, you're paying for labour with this, recognised. And so what you then are doing, so the reason I'm saying is because one thing that matters is because how you then store and keep your own personal wealth and labour is a reflection of how much you respect yourself, how much you value, I think, your time, your labour. I understand, obviously, not everyone has the ability or the exposure to be aware of maybe better ways to store and preserve wealth. So I'm not trying to be a snob about it that everyone should know, but I do think can be a quite accurate reflection on, you know, someone's mental picture of themselves, how they feel about themselves, and you know, and so some people will look at crypto and be like, "This is risky, it's dangerous, you shouldn't do it, it's scams, people lose money, it's too unpredictable." Basically, it's nothing, you know, because it's not something anyone's really seen since obviously .com, but even .com I wouldn't really say the same, because that was kind of different. That was, to get access to that market, you still had to have, sometimes you had to go for, let's say, brokerage companies and something like that, which is kind of the case with crypto. But it does feel like people are far more technically savvy than they were during .com boom era. But my nephew could stumble across a crypto ad and just use his mum's credit card and buy something. He'd know how to interact with it. So I think it's probably a lot bigger. And also, it's then, last time we've seen anything like this would have been, you know, the whole tulip bubble thing we hear about, or, you know, the East India Dock shares, you know, stuff here about those stories. And rambling aside, I think the important thing about it is the only people, these people, if you nail down into it, they find it as risky, but they don't know anything about it. You know, you talk to them, so what? I kind of give up asking this question. I was like, why do you think it's risky? Why is it risky? And say that, like, sterling, dollar, and then, you know, and I will go back and, like, say, I work in real estate, so I work in property, and often I'll talk to clients about, you know, what they're doing with the money, why they're selling, and so on. And they'll say to me, "Oh, you good? You got any property?" I went, "I don't own property; it's too risky." And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, I've worked in it for 6 odd years. And it's just far too risky, and that's it. The idea of sovereignty, being in control of me and myself and my eyes as much as I can. Obviously, there's many externalities I will never be able to control. That's not for me to worry about. But things that I can control, I will do my best to control. So my issue of property versus even things like stocks and shares, I'd rather hold an equivalent amount of money in stocks and shares than the value of a house. Reason being, I know I could, like that, sell it. The gains may not be as, well, it depends what shares you're looking at. It may not be as astronomical, or certain properties in certain areas over a certain period of time. And I have clients saying that's very short-term thinking, but I'm like, yeah, but I'm very, very aware. Maybe I could say something because of the background where I've come from, but I'm very, very aware of what it's taken to get to having X amount of money at my disposal. And so if I cannot have instant control because a government's doing some crazy shit, or, you know, just general economic sentiments has crashed. I mean, like Mike was saying, you know, it's all good having these assets, but chances are, like, because we've all probably had parents, the older generation, you should buy, bricks and mortar, money's in bricks and mortar, it's always safe and secure. Yeah, but if you think about it, the time you're probably going to need to release that equity is when everyone else needs to. And if you want to, even if you want to release equity, a bank can still say no to you if you don't earn enough. There's too many other parties that are in my way. And especially in the UK, a transaction can take 6 months to go through. So it's a bit different in the rest of the world, about a month. It's very bureaucratic and nonsense here. Hopefully it'll be fixed one day. And so that also heightens my concern of risk, where say with crypto, stocks and shares, crypto more stocks and shares that you can instantly liquidate on some even decentralized exchanges over the counter. There's apps where you can meet people and so on. But yeah,
I think you're pointing to something very important, which is a different understanding of wealth than money in the bank, which is to have options. Like, to me, the definition of wealth is to have options, meaning that I can choose to do things differently. I can choose to fly somewhere. I can choose to do things that I couldn't do otherwise. And so for me, the money is just like the current manifestation, or the easiest to make use of, like, manifestation of wealth. But all kinds of other things also give you options. For example, skills give you options, relationships give you options. And so in a sense, I feel very wealthy, even though I don't have a lot of like liquid funds in my bank account, or crypto for that matter. And so I think people tend to only see wealth in like the numbers in their bank account, and then try to optimize that at the expense of all kinds of other things that would be giving them the options that they actually should be after. Rather than going and like having a healthy life, being around good people, and sort of pursuing some things that they care about, that kind of stuff. So I think wealth is options, and then also it's basically time. How much time can you afford to not have to sell, in a sense?
100%. I mean, yeah, I've definitely been through that myself regarding the stinking is money over everything, right? Those slogans you see in here, and you're 100% right. And it's with age, I guess, comes wisdom, but also being open to it. It's most of the exciting shit I've done in my life that I've valued and remember. It's nothing to do with money. It's just been the people I've been around, people I've met by chance. Like, even now, I'm just thinking that gives me a smile. Some of the crazy shit. It could be a random conversation till 2-3 in the morning in an open green space in Lithuania many, many years ago. Like, stuff like that. Those things I remember. It's not
right.
It's. I mean, I don't know. Come talk to me when I've got £1 million on my bank account. I may have a different message to sing, but but
the thing is, like, it's not really, it's not some hippie thing either. It's not like, oh, like, just kumbaya and like be out in the wild and like that's all that you need. Like, and we do some of that, and like it is great, but I think, like, of course, this only becomes true after a certain minimum of security in financial sense, in a sense. But there was this thing that I read recently, that IQ only correlates with income or sort of wealth to a certain degree, and then it stops correlating. And that's because actually the smarter you get, the easier it is for you to generate money as you need to. And so that becomes less interesting after like you've reached a certain number, and like now you're just spending your time, I don't know, researching stuff or being around the right people or whatever. Like, some people don't choose to pull the same lever that gives them money like forever, but choose to play other levers.
Even I've got something to back that up. I don't have it on me. Many years ago, say 3-4 years ago, I remember there was a few articles popping about, the whole anti-university thing, and I'm definitely not against that. I wish I don't say I wish I hadn't gone. Great experience, great people, and it's a very libertarian university, so I lucked out. But there was a chart came out about people got like school GEDs, let's say diplomas, and you've got your income as it goes to undergraduate, postgraduate, PhD. Your income is like this tank down here, and that could be massively what you were saying, Moritz, as well, because it was so funny because these people,
they're so smart, they're stupid again.
Sure, and that's how it was pitched. They weren't saying from the other side things like you were saying that they've got to the point where I'm good. What do I want to do with my hours, my minutes, my seconds on this planet? But yeah, I know. So Emil was. So yeah, I'll jump back in later on, have a chat with you. But I know he's gonna say some bits.
I just want to say that what most people forget about the real estate for the average of people wanting to invest is like they don't have the money, so they have to borrow from the bank, and then they'll be locked up for 30 to 35 years in that house. and that means complete lack of freedom. It means that they're completely locked up, basically, with handcuffs on by their bank. And if they're not able to pay their bills, which most of the time are they almost put it to the limit as what they can afford with really good jobs, which means they're completely locked up. So if they lose their jobs, they can go out on the street, and the house will be sold, and it will be sold for much less, and they won't be able, they'll actually have lost money on it by living in their dream house or whatever the story they sell is. And you don't need all that. Like, that's what people are sold. Like we talked about in so many episodes, like we need a big house, we need big cars, we need all these things, but it doesn't have any effect on happiness. And there's a really old study, I think it's like 10, 20 years old, that I think it's more than, I think it was very, very low actually. I think it was more than $5,000 per house income doesn't add to the average enjoyment of life or the average happiness. So that's a really low amount compared to what most people are willing to lock up their freedom in houses that are worth much more, and it's not going to give them anything. And if you look at some of the poor places in the world, like if you go to Thailand, Vietnam, people sitting outside in the sun all day with their families, and they live in a cardboard shed more or less, and they're so happy, and they're just enjoying life, and they're together with their family, they're swimming in fresh water, they're really happy, they're just playing around all day, they don't need anything, they have no education, they haven't gone to school, they probably have no computer, no iPhone, no nothing, but they're super happy. So the whole idea about wealth comes for me from somewhere completely different. And I learned a lot from traveling and seeing like how some of the most simple living people are some of the most happiest, and how we have so much shit that locks us up completely. And even just like personal stuff, having inside the house, I feel completely different. When the house is filled with a lot of stuff, it can be gadgets or anything lying around, it really sucks our energy. So all the stuff we own, it just sucks the energy completely out of us. So if we get rid of some of all of that, we just become more free and more happy. And it's also easier to have the house tidy or to clean it up when there's less stuff.
Yeah.
So definitely some of all of that is just really sucking energy on us. And
I moved here to Lithuania with like one backpack and one suitcase, and now I'm getting to the point where I can travel for weeks on end with just a backpack, and like I'm self-sufficient with that. And like I'm getting even to the point where even the backpack won't be full anymore. Like where like I'll just have 2 t-shirts, like 2 sets of underwear, and it's like that's enough, you know. It's amazing how free you feel when these things aren't tying you down, because you don't have a relationship with all this different stuff, and your energy in your mind and your body can go towards all the creative stuff that you're engaging in. And it's sort of this process of first building up enough capacity and like all the stuff that you have to do the things you want to do, and then paring it down again, like compacting functionality into sort of higher quality about smaller number of things. And so that's been really powerful for me as well. And I want to comment on something that you said, Emil, about debt, and then I think Peter can also give us his opinion about crypto and money and wealth. But debt to me, like both financial debt and all kinds of other debt where I am obligated to do something for somebody else, is sort of a diminution of my agency. And there's sort of, especially with financial debt, I think that comes this phenomenon also of sort of karmic debt, in a sense, like not in a woo-woo kind of way, but in the sense that if you feel like if you are living on the time that you've borrowed, or the money that you've borrowed from somebody else, your time is not your time, and you're you're working for the other person or for the other institution or whatever it is. And I think it has a radically detrimental effect on you if you are living a life of borrowing and of debt. And so for me, it's been absolutely crucial that I'm never in somebody's debt more than they are in debt to me, in a sense, or to and to also have no financial debt at all. Like I hate to be in debt, and so I never buy something on credit cards. I never buy something on borrowing, and so I think that's absolutely crucial.
What about those air miles, mate? Oh my gosh, you're missing out. My gosh, you're missing out.
I started doing that like sometime last year, but yeah, it's slow.
But it's interesting, right? Like everyone is watching the TV all the time and getting fed with all this information of all the stuff they need. They need the new car, they need the new espresso machine, they need all these things, and they don't realize that they are just indebting themselves more and more and more by buying all that stuff.
It's because of our financial system, like of all this. inflation coming, like driving the psychological need for you to spend now rather than to save for later, because your money will be worth less. And so it's just rational. It's rational on the like short-term horizon to spend, but it is not rational on the long-term horizon. So in overall, the whole system is encouraging short-term thinking. Like my friend Skinner Lane was recently on a podcast, this Emerge podcast, and he made this beautiful point about like fascism died of a heart attack, communism died of starvation, and consumerism will die of diabetes. Like in this sense of like you're just eating yourself sick because like at every particular small moment, like, oh sure I want to have that sugar, or sure I want to have that Coke, or sure I want to have that cake, or sure I want to do like the thing that feels very good right now. And then you're just constantly having this low time horizon and high time preference, and you're spending away all the health that you have.
I want to hand it to Petter because he hasn't said anything yet. Give him a chance to say. I've got one point on risk, which I don't want to let go because it came up while Lynn was speaking. So I'm just going to say that one point. And it's really important because when we're talking about risk, you know, people say crypto is risky or this is risky. Oftentimes we can't separate what's actual risk versus what is just our ignorance. And sometimes your ignorance is the risk. That is the biggest risk. And when it comes to money and wealth and investment, I would say 9 times out of 10 it's people's ignorance that gets them into trouble, not like they got into a risky investment. So you can take property as an example, right? It's a perfect example because like our parents' generation, property wasn't as risky. It was like a 3 times yearly income multiple. So if your annual salary was 20,000, the average house was 60,000, and that was just on one person's salary. And that's why we only had typically the man would work and the woman didn't have to work in the family, right? That was the typical. That was their generation. And obviously, as the world got financialized, you know, it got more and more expensive. People had to borrow more. Both parents, everyone had to work to make those payments. And so now people are borrowing like 10 times, 15 times the multiple of the annual salary to borrow that much. And it's just way overstretched. The only reason they're able to borrow that much is because the banks and the governments have reduced interest rates to stimulate borrowing. So because people will spend, like we've just been saying about the economy is based on consumerism, people only spend based on how rich they feel. They feel that based on where they have their wealth. And if their house is going up at 10% a year, then they feel wealthy, then they'll keep spending. And so it's that illusion of driving confidence into the real estate game and convincing everyone that's the best place to put your money. Over the long term, property always goes up, blah, 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 blah. Like this is all just belief systems that have been brainwashed into people. And, you know, it may have been true 50 years ago when the economics made different sense. You didn't have to borrow, 30 years, 50 years of mortgage. But now when you do, the optionality you're giving up, we just talked about that a bit, right? The optionality of where your money is, not only is it illiquid in property, the optionality to get your money out when you need it isn't there compared to other assets, but the optionality in terms of your time, because you're giving up 30 years of work, 40, 50 years of work, and you can't give that up unless you lose your house. So you've invested so much in that belief system, it forces you to keep investing. So you lose optionality of time. And because you've lost that optionality of time to experience different experiences, your richness isn't there. And so you'll seek a novelty from other things like overindulging in food and wherever you can in the little optionality you have left in your life. And so these things kind of cascade onto each other. And it's a really important thing about risk is that you're gonna lose so much more in the things you've given up by trying to pile all your money into this one thing and you've been told is not risky, or it's, this is what everyone else is doing. So the herd mentality of following the herd, doing what's worked for previous generations, when you look at how economies change, cycles change, you've got to update your database. You've got to look at your brain and say, okay, is property the same asset class it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago? No, it's not. It's not even close. There are some places in the world where property isn't financialized and it's actually still much closer to the 3 times multiple. So in places like Eastern Europe, for example, you can still buy property without breaking your back for 30, 40, 50 years. And in those places, it may still make sense to, put some money into property. But to have 80, 90% of your, wealth tied up in something that isn't even yours, unless you pay it back in 30, 40, 50 years, it's insane. And the optionality you give up, that is where the risk starts to really hit you. So that's just a point I really want to hit home. When people think about risk, oftentimes your ignorance that's the risk, and then you can make better decisions. So I know you guys all got questions.
I'm so sorry.
No, I really want to let Petter say something, and then we can come back to that point. Go on, Petter.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna get away from the whole money thing for a bit. My voice is okay. So I spend a lot of time looking at alternative economic systems, sort of post-capitalism, post-scarcity type of thing. So when I first saw Bitcoin, it didn't really interest me because it's just money, so it didn't change much. And then I found a few years later, when I found Ethereum, I was like, oh, okay, we can do something with this. It's way more than money. How do I saw it as a way to there's already communities that practice sort of alternative systems, off the grid communities where people live better lives, it seems like it. And so why can't we do that on a bigger scale? And then I saw Ethereum as a way to scale up this sort of closer economic systems to above the numbers number, because you have reputation, you have voting, you have things like Colony, which are better labor distribution platforms that are not hierarchical organizations, but horizontal. And then I saw tokens and ICOs, which I saw as the perfect marriage between securities and loyalty points. How do I explain it better? Basically Kickstarter on steroids, because now small people can invest in businesses and they get equity and not just rewards like on Kickstarter. And so I expected ICOs to be done for everything, from coffee shops to, I don't know, anything you need in your small little community. That didn't turn out very good so far. We ended up with pages and pages of disclaimers, but we are getting the STOs, so that should be something. That's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, the ICO boom and bust is just sort of an expansion or extension of the crypto boom bust, right? It's like the speculative element that comes at the end of it. People get really excited about it and all the ideas and possibilities, but the maturity of the ideas and the tech takes time. And so you have that all the time, that sort of, peak mania, then the trough, and stuff actually has to get built, and then finally the tech matures, and things can take off again. So we're kind of seeing some projects that did ICOs even 3-4 years ago, and now they're starting to finally build up the tech that took time because the tech's new. And when that tech actually gets used and adopted, you're going to see the second sort of wave of boom in those companies. But a lot of companies did ICOs last year. A lot of them aren't going to deliver because they were just ideas, and there was a quick way of raising money based on the back of everyone's crypto riches that were it's just like new money that people didn't really understand how to value. And so people threw money around very, very easily because suddenly they were rich and they didn't have to work for it the same way that they would have had to accumulate that kind of wealth, in previous generations. So I think that whole boom bust cycle just got even more crazy. And we're still going to see the fallout of that. Probably a lot of companies, won't deliver. And like with startups and VCs anyways, they invest in that basis. They assume, 9 out of 10 of their investments are going to go to zero, and they're looking for the one that's going to make, all the other ones worthwhile. So that's kind of how it is with ICOs. And I would say to most people getting into crypto, don't start there, because that's the sort of tail end of the risk. When we talk about risk return, there is definite risks there that don't apply to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and these other currencies that have a bigger network effect and are slightly more proven in terms of community and traction and stuff. So there's all kind of places to invest within cryptocurrency and the blockchain space. But Emil, I'll hand it over to you, and then back to Liam for the questions you guys had.
I just wanted to add to what Peter says about Ethereum and the whole world that blockchain opened up for some of all the poorest people in the world as well, people without IDs, without passports, without bank accounts, without anything. And I actually heard a story about a tribe somewhere in Asia that they had one computer in the tribe, and they all got together, and somehow they managed to, I don't know whether they bought some Bitcoin locally or how they did it, but they managed to get into an ICO that did 100x, and the whole tribe just completely life-changing for them. And I think there were around 20-30 people or something in that tribe, and everything just completely flipped, changed completely. They could, instead of having to live in complete scarcity, they could just buy food for the whole village and share some of all that goodness, and that's just from technology, without the banks, without the financial system, without anything, just by having a computer, which is some of the cool stuff it really unlocks as well. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, Emil, what you're saying about Venezuela, or say these countries where we've seen human conditions, horrible conditions that people being put through in societies that were like decades before, like what people strive to become, you know. And I like to use those because it seems as a species, I'm sure it's a whole nother conversation, we've gotten to the point where we disassociate ourselves. It's probably survival because we go nuts and not be able to do anything, but we disassociate ourselves from other people's realities because it's not my reality, it's different. It has to be different because it's, you know, X, Y, and Z. And I like to use those because I'll talk about Venezuela and how wealthy it was. I even talk about places like Iran, for example, and how wealthy it was, or how amazing, you know, so at least societally in like the 60s and 70s comparative to where it is now. I'd rather be a woman there in the 60s than probably here in the 60s, to be honest. You know, how these things have changed, and though that's not always directly associated to money, but it is the who had power, who, you know, those with lots of money and wealth. But yeah, so that's my little bit there. But what I was going to say, interestingly, about what Mike was, I think, touched on as well about property, and I think more kind of continue my little rant. When I talk to anyone over the age of 50, and I don't know, I rent, I don't own property, and I purposely don't own property. And they say, "Are you throwing your money away?" You know, my house is my bank account. My house is my retirement fund. I'm like, all right then, you know, obviously if I'm more professionally, I've got my suit and tie on. Okay, you know, well, try and get anyone to borrow you money when you're retired on your property. They won't, because, I mean, it's hard enough to get at age 50 in the UK because their mortgage terms are like, it wouldn't be enough to justify the amount you want to take out the property, even if you own it outright. Say you got £300,000 in equity in it, they may let you take out 50. You know, it's just little things like that. And, you know, you try and put those realities to them, because these are things, again, like Mike was saying, 20, 30 years ago, the multiple on your income was completely fine. And if you were happy, you know, it was like 3 times your income for one person, and it worked and it was fine. So I understand they come from a completely different perspective. So I often have these conversations, say, with my mum, my aunts and stuff like that, you know, and I'll be telling them, no, the reality of the situation is just not the same. And, you know, there are indicators out there showing that you should probably still saving money by renting for the time being. I mean, if I was going to buy something, it'd be a multi-household development, like flats or something. I wouldn't look to buy a single unit place in the UK. Like Mike's saying, places like Georgia, Lithuania. I know I've got ancestry back in Lithuania, so I'm looking to try and get a bit more information, try and get my citizenship, because they would chase out being Jews, and maybe be able to get somewhere out there. That'd be pretty cool, because again, the multiples just makes far much more sense. Great location. I mean, yeah, Vilnius is probably one of my favorite cities. But yeah, it's very, very important, because this goes back to, in my opinion, risk tolerance, understanding. And yes, this is new. Like, it's not as old as gold, it's not as old as property. But those 3 things, crypto, gold, and property, all have very, very different counterparty risks. Property, it's purely effective because you can't move it. Yes, gold's harder to move, but you can move it. Property, unless you're going to do what the Americans did and buy a whole bridge and just ship it from England to the US, like, it's not going to happen. So you're reliant, and if you're aware of those risks, it's fine. Go for it. More power to you. But you get these people talking about as if like it's gospel and it's fact. It's just not the case anymore for a lot of Westerns, like a lot of countries in the West, at least. And it's something that actually really, really bothers me, because I'll see people who, you know, who are younger than me, say they'll buy a property, and that you know, we'll talk about what you've been up to. I know, working, you know, and, you know, going out with mates and stuff. There's nothing wrong with that if you love it, but it's not by choice. This is because they can't afford to travel. They can't afford to have a year off because they have a year's money in the bank, you know, to pay for themselves. You know, they don't have these, and obviously they had the funds to get the deposit, because the deposit's massive still. You got to put down that 10% of the property value. So if it's 30 grand, you got to put down. You can live in China as a prince, like a couple of years on that. Live in Thailand for even longer. In Bali, you know, so parts. You know, if you live right, you can live like an absolute prince and experience the life of someone earning multiples, you know, back home. And it's just, yeah, it's when they compensate, like saying, you know, take substances or, you know, live in lives that, you know, and one of my concerns is definitely a rant, but it's I don't ever want to regret. I think the benefit of having lost a sibling at such a young age helped to make me think, all right. I mean, he did so much in his life, so much, traveled so much. Like he's traveled by age like 12, 13, 14, more places than probably multiple adults that I probably ever have. Like I say, people a lot older, just because of the exposure and lucky with the parents we had. And so I've always been kept in mind that, you know, it's not to, you know, just travel for the sake of it, don't set down routes for the sake of it, but is this truly what I want? Is this truly enriching to me? And it may not be enriching to me in 20 years. That's a future Lynn to worry about to some extent. I've got some provisions for future Lynn. He's going to be fine. But for me right now, I'm trying to, you know, work out, is this something that actually is it nourishing to my soul? Is it nourishing to my mind and my body? And that's why it's, like Emil was saying, there's people straddling themselves now, so much debt. It can then be like a snowball effect, because so many other negative things come from it. Because we naturally, I think, like Moritz saying, I mean, I think it's definitely, Mike probably attest to this. They may not associate him as British. I'm sure he's got a passport. There's a thing about being British where you just hate owing someone a favour. It's the worst thing in the world. Like, owing someone a favour, do anything you can to not do it. And so, even if it's like someone doing like some DIY for you, I'm going to give them money. It's going to turn up in their bank account, in their PayPal, somewhere, because I do not want to owe you that favour. Because I think there's an inherent part of us knowing that if that's someone else's time that you're living off of, and yeah, it's probably why slavery didn't last too much. Well, I can't even talk about it because slavery is relative, I guess. But it's one of those things where I genuinely think that being able to escape all debts, even if you're not living this ideal life that was the ideal 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, I know the American dream where you own it, it's just changed now, it's different. And they've seen fortunately, there is a trend drifting away from having to own and more like a sharing society. And I know it's kind of a whole different thing. I know that's a whole different thing, but
you're opening up a lot of rabbit holes here, Lynn. Trying to think where we're going to steer this conversation after you're finished.
Staying in school, I'll end that bit there, because I know I'm kind of like this letting it out, but it's a place to be. But yeah, this is really something that is I'm gonna hand over to Emil now. We're stopping now.
Add something to one of the things you said about being in debt for a favor, and I think I've had two different sides of that. Yeah, I understand, like, you don't want to be indebted, but there's something a good friend told me many years ago in the Philippines as well, that sometimes when people are giving from abundance and like unconditionally, it's actually very nice to just receive it and accept that they're actually giving it. They want to give something for free of their time, and they will actually gain, like most of you probably know in theory and probably felt it as well, like giving is giving you way more than actually receiving. So allowing someone to give something and receiving it without paying them back is can be a really beautiful thing if both are on the same level of abundance and able to accept it and without feeling guilty, anything like that. Because I realized that especially in the poorer countries like the Philippines, could be something random like a fisherman helping you pull up your boat or something like that, and you feel like, oh, should I tip him like $5 or something? And you're actually negligating his favor by giving him something, because you're actually telling him, oh, this beautiful thing you did for me, it's worth $5. It's actually pulling the whole energy towards money, and like, not that money is dirty, but it's kind of like moving the energy into something else when he's just really giving from a beautiful place. Like, hey, you need help? Cool, I'm gonna help you out. And I realized that a lot by traveling. Like, sometimes it's good to tip because you feel like, okay, now's the right time. But sometimes it's also very good to just receive, because most of these people, they are abundant in energy, time, all these things, and they want to give because they are already super perfectly happy. They don't need $5. And even if you give them those $5, you're kind of doing in the moment a little bit, because they feel like, okay, thank you, I really just wanted to help you. But I think it's from a Western mindset, and we always think like, oh, now I'm indebted or something. But there can be definitely two sides to that.
Sure. I completely agree.
100%.
There's something about like money basically closes the interaction, in the sense like, okay, we're doing something and like you're helping me, like, and basically what you're saying is I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. So that's fine, like, because especially if you're like, if you're all the time like interacting with somebody and you're only ever taking, then of course like this is going to be a an irreciprocal arrangement, you don't want to have that. So I think there's a difference in the sort of environment where you're happy to receive, where people feel like they want to give, because for them they're not actually like they're not it doesn't cost them anything. It's actually the joy they receive from helping you is their reward in a sense. It's sort of a self-generated reward, and so I think it doesn't really contradict. It's just the different setting and the different mindset and different also difference perhaps in whether you're going to interact multiple times or not.
No, so true. I mean, it's like, like an elderly neighbour I help with a shopping, 100% happy, warm feeling inside. That's why I don't need payment. Wouldn't expect it. I know the government pension is really, really bad. But it's something like, you've got a friend that's a plumber, want help me do some plumbing on my house. I'm like, he might want me to babysit. I'm like, I don't want to do, that's what I'm thinking. So yeah, that's what I was thinking. So yeah, so you and Emil are completely right. Yeah, those nice bits. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's a little hard to balance in the Western world. Fixed, like there's a energy transfer somehow and something they can rely on. So it can be a little bit hard balancing in the Western world. And sometimes you can also use it, I believe, for a way to show the universe that you actually put a lot of energy to something which you want to support. So you're putting a lot of money that way or something. So you're telling the energy, hey, go there, go support this thing, and it actually helps as well, even for your own stuff. Like if you want to grow a garden, then go buy a shovel, and then actually all supporting that idea to the next step. And it works the same way with people. I found, like, if you want something to grow, then plant the seed, and sometimes that seed is money for now.
Yeah.
Interesting way to use it.
No, I think I remember having this conversation with my other half's mum. She's like from India, and like she was telling, we talk about the differences. For example, she asked me a question, how are your neighbours? I went, I don't really know. I don't talk to them. I try not to talk to them. You hear them having arguments through the wall, but apart from that, you try not to have a chat with them or anything like that. But and she's like, I wonder why that is. That's so strange. And during this conversation, it kind of made me think about, the advantages and disadvantages of, maybe not disadvantages, just the changes that come from wealth. When you come from a place of, I guess, financial abundance, not necessarily like actual mental abundance, but when you got, I'm going to think, if you come from like how can I put this? If you think about how our ancestors would have been, recent ancestors, in order to survive, you need to clump together. Like even in a place like Alaska right now, their community spirit is going to be so much more intense because they know that if they could die, like the natural disaster risk is so much higher there that I think it's of innate benefit for someone to always know who you are, to always talk to people at the shops, and they will know, I haven't seen this person today, what's happened to them, where are they? They'll start asking about, do you know where this person is, and so on. And I think it's one of the, I'm so sorry about that. And probably a neighbour. It's those whereas here now, technically you could live your life. I mean, you have the hermits, it's another class of people in Japan. They're known, Otaku, I can't remember, where their whole life is spent in their room. Maybe they'll see their parent once every week because they occupy a room in this house and it's left alone. Because they can order everything online to come to them. They don't need to go anywhere. They've got access to income for whatever reason. Obviously, this isn't everyone, but it's in the possibility. And there's like less extreme versions of that as you go down. And I think that's possibly why, like in places, where we would say they're objectively financially poorer, that there's probably more community spirit because it's an innate human, probably survival mechanism, to be honest, to be kind, give, because you kind of want someone to have that debt, so you can kind of call it in, but not overtly call it in. But yeah, I'm just spitballing here.
I think that's like that sort of social system is the way that you do labor division in a small group setting, and it is actually much more efficient than to use money, because if you were to use money, like working out the differences and like accounting, like that's actually more cumbersome than just saying, hey, I owe you, and then next time you owe me. And so but once you scale beyond that small setting, you need to have more precise measuring than that. And so I think it is actually, think about like communism works great. It just works great in the family and not anywhere like at a larger scale. So as you go outwards in scale, you need to have more like stranger to stranger type of like accounting happen, where you want to close the interaction in the instant of the interaction rather than keep the score.
That's a really good point. I think when we talk about like money, energy, and currency, like a lot of these things are evolving because of the scale of trade, right? So we're in a global society now. We're doing business with people all over the world. Like we're not going to have the same type of interactions or closeness or trust as like exchanging favors and exchanging time and labor within our small communities. So I do think that some of that is valuable, that we're missing some of that, and that is something we can, you know, create with these, like Petter was saying, these off-grid communities and more sort of social living, where I think it adds more meaning to life, and you feel like, you know, people have got your back, and you just feel like it's a safer world in that sense. If you're living in a big city and you don't really know anyone, you don't really trust anyone, like it's just, I don't know, I just don't feel as warm, I don't feel as friendly. I have to really guard my energy and just keep my head down. And so I personally don't enjoy living in those type of environments. But the world is trending towards urbanization, and I think that's also quite interesting as a point. Is like, you look at the populations of, you know, most developed countries, even in like London and all these places like New York, Singapore, the populations are concentrating into these urban areas. So this is just a fact of life, as, you know, I guess technology concentrates people, and business and money, wealth concentrates people, and we get people moving into the cities, that we're going to need better ways of transferring value that don't have those middlemen, those sort of counterparties, and those sort of, you know, just people siphoning off bits of your wealth. So I think that's probably where the world is headed on a larger scale, and for other people to think about, okay, how can I control or have sovereignty of my money in this world where there are a lot of strangers and there are a lot of sort of, you know, people I don't necessarily want to have deep interactions with, or just can't afford to because there's just so many people. Right. And it's interesting, the idea of property as well, coming back to that for a second, because we talk about, you know, where to put your money and what's safe and what's got risk. And I think that cities will keep increasing to some degree in value in terms of the raw land, but the way that interest rates have been manipulated, and the regulations and the bureaucracy, and the fact that governments are now bankrupt and having to look for ways to tax people, like property is just one of the main asset classes they can just keep squeezing and tax people. And you actually have people now in Greece turning down inheritances. Like they have houses that were their parents or grandparents who died, and it should fall to them, but they're actually turning away and walking away from that because the tax obligation, because the taxes are now so onerous that actually they couldn't afford to pay the taxes, so they actually walk away from the property. And you saw this when Rome collapsed, is that people would actually walk away from their properties, from their land, because the rules were just too onerous, the taxes were too onerous. And so that's sort of late stage empire issues, and I think that's happening now, not just in Greece and Cyprus and these countries, but more and more in Europe. You know, they're taxing obviously the foreign investors first because they can squeeze them. They're taxing people who have second homes, who are vacant, and sort of very easy to justify that with populist things, you know, saying we haven't got enough homes, we haven't got enough for, you know, for the average people, we need to reclaim this. Like in Berlin now, they're doing that. And so, you know, in terms of private property rights, you know, you can argue that you need the utility value of those houses for the people, but in terms of an investment, what is your asset is really not your asset. It's whatever the government decides at the time, whatever the social sentiment changes, and then some law gets passed and some tax gets passed, and that's just the cycle with bankrupt governments, is they will look to tax that money any way they can, and because it's so illiquid and you can't move it around, that is an easy target, and I think we're just going to see more and more of that. So the risks, again, in this generation, in this stage of the cycle with property, it's not where you want to have 80-90% of your money. Like if you're an investor and you're investing, you know, to like buy up a bunch of flats and rent them out in the city because the population, like I said, urbanization is a trend, and you see there's going to be demand for these things, that's very different. And you're cash flowing it, and it's just like another business you get a loan for, and you take risk, right? That's just another form of leverage. But if you're individually storing up your time and your personal labor, there's no leverage in that. You're just basically paying half your salary into a mortgage, and half of that is going as interest to the bank. So yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many scams in terms of wealth and money and what we perceive as value. And even if your house's price is going up nominally, you know, like, oh, my house price, I bought it for 250,000, now it's 300,000 pounds. Yeah, but that 300,000 pounds is worth less than the 250,000 pounds you bought at the time. So people really struggle with the nominal value of something and the real value of something. And that's where you really need to understand inflation, interest rates. This is where crypto is basically going to kick everything else's butt, essentially, because, you know, it doesn't have those massive leaks in the system where governments have to just keep borrowing and borrowing to spend. I'm going to rant a little bit more, Emil, and I'll hand it to you. But basically, if you look at the economies now in developed nations, about 50% of the economies are propped up by government spending. That is public GDP, right? So public sector makes about 50% of GDP in most countries now in Europe, and getting there in the US. So that those people are actually generating wealth. They're redistributing wealth from the private sector where money is made, and then it gets redistributed, through welfare, through social benefits, through blah blah blah, government sector, jobs, all those things. And some of it is valuable, yes, but a lot of it is not. And then you have war and you have debt on top, and those things are just increasing as a percentage of public spending and GDP. So those trends are not sustainable, and that is why currencies are losing value, because governments are just siphoning off bigger and bigger chunks of the private sector and choking the private sector because of what they're doing with interest rates. So when you have really cheap cost of borrowing, you basically artificially prop up a bunch of insolvent businesses and sectors and industries, and you don't have that die-off, and that you need that die-off. Basically, if you don't have that, you get kind of a zombie economy where nothing is productive, nothing grows, and there's no return on anything, and you just print. And yeah, maybe house prices go up nominally, but the real value of the economy is kind of struggling and falling. And I think that's globally what's happening now, is that everything is kind of turning into what Japan has done since 1990 when their economy started contracting. So this policy of central banks, what they're doing, it's not sustainable. They want to go take interest rates negative now and ban cash so they can force you to spend. Like Moritz was saying, if your currency is failing, you've got to spend today because it's worth less tomorrow. I mean, that is a hell of a way to prop up an economy, and you don't want to be sucked into a system like that where you have to save in that kind of currency. I mean, how the hell are you going to save any kind of wealth in that currency? It's just nuts. And property is not going to survive that kind of trend. It's not going to be some magic hole, magic gold pot you can stick into and it's going to survive that. Government's going to tax it the same as everything else. So there's very few systems that are sort of outside of that closed loop system, and cryptocurrency is definitely one of those things, and that's why it's coming about now, and I think it's really worth paying attention to. But yeah, go on, Moritz, and then Emil.
Just one very small thing, like investing in mobile wealth, and like mobile meaning like something you can actually take with you. Of course, like you can carry gold with you, but also, hey, I can carry my skills with me. I can carry my relationships with me. I can carry like the cryptocurrency as well with me, like literally in my mind if I need to. So actually, I think that's something that's completely underestimated and underemphasized, which is if I invest in really strong relationships, like really, really strong, like really friendships, that kind of thing is a powerful bond between you that allows you to like draw on somebody's support when they need it, or to actually together pursue something that will make you both of you money, or like multiple people. Like I think we have forgotten that how actually wealth is created. It's always in the setting of like a small group of men, like basically fucking around for a bit and like supporting each other, and then figuring out something that works and then just scaling it up. And so pretty much like what we're doing right now, like we're just shooting the shit, but at some point, maybe we'll figure, oh, like this is something we could productize, or this is something we could charge access to, or whatever. And then that's how you actually end up doing something. But you have to have that syncing up period at the beginning and the supporting each other period so that you actually get there.
Definitely.
I only have a little comment to add. It's like, yeah, when you want to play the real estate game, like most people do, they think it's kind of like just part of reality. Like, when you reach a certain age, you have to invest in real estate because then you have to grow old and you'll have a house. And everyone is betting on that house to be like, I don't know, twice as much worth when they retire or when the 30 years are up. But what they're doing is betting on a very risky game where they just think that prices will just keep going up and everything will just keep staying the same for 30 years, which is pretty crazy in these times when you think about it. And what they're also doing is they're also hurting the chances for people with less money that don't want to bind up 30 at a time and a lot of money into houses. Like, so the house price is going up so much, so students can't afford a small student apartment. They can't even afford to rent. We're going to get in Sweden in apartments to be able to go to the university because the prices are propped up so much. Everyone just lending like crazy. So one thing that most people, they don't consider when they play that game, like they're actually playing with someone else's money as well. All the people who don't want to bind up that, and the prices just keep rising, and it's not gonna last.
I lost Emil there. Anyone else?
Yeah, I thought he paused for dramatic effects or something.
Sure. That's fine. I should be back. But yeah, his point was obviously, the generational game of what the boomers were doing, and it's not going to work necessarily for us. They're relying on two things, like you're saying, the value of their property to go up, and there's a pension that's going to be there for them that's going to be worth something in terms of purchasing power. I mean, it's very easy to pay a pension out of $1,000 a month, but when that $1,000 isn't worth anything anymore, then it's a very different game.
100%. He might have run and jumped into the snow by now. I don't know. He might have had enough of this.
We're also hitting the end of our time, I think.
Oh yeah, wow. There's fly, eh?
Yeah, we're coming up on time, so we'll probably wrap it up soon. But yeah, I think in sort of summary, this discussion went quite broad in terms of, what is money and energy and time. And now I probably want to get into another show on other ways to look at time, because, money is just sort of one abstraction of that, and how you store that. And we give up a lot to store time that we don't even appreciate. So there's whole other worlds of like how to measure time. And we have other bank accounts people don't talk about, like your health and how to look at that, and the sort of trade-offs you're putting in, like people are putting in 10, 12-hour laptop days to store time up and into some sort of value. They hope they get to spend that later, right? But if you retire at 67, your health's not there, or you just deplete your health and your energy because of working too hard in a startup or something, you burn out. It's happening more and more. I think people are going to reevaluate how much time do I need to put in, and this is the thing: if you can put it in and get a better investment or a better store value, you need to put less time in, and then you can enjoy more of your time, and you can put it into other things like building up your health and enjoying life with experience and stuff. So we could probably branch out and do another show on that. But I did a pretty good mean on this whole sort of concept of rent is dead money and how people have been looking at this for a while. So I think some of those sort of assumptions are going to change as obviously people realize, oh, my pension's not there, my property's not worth what I thought it was, I can't transact, I can't pull money out of it. Like what you were saying, Lynn, about the bank won't lend you money, equity out of your house if you're too old. So actually it tells you a lot about what they're seeing the value is. The value is not in the house, it's in your ability to keep servicing the payments on that house. And again, it comes back to you. It's you are the primary source of the wealth, and they're just taxing a piece of you and wrapping it up in something called a house. So that says everything. When you look at the banks that want to take on risk, like assuming this house is going to be worth what it is on paper, they know it's a paper game. They want to make sure there's some real money behind that, some real energy, and that's you, and that's making payments into that house. And if you can't do that because you're too old and they think you're not going to be able to get a job or keep working because your health is faded, you'll find out just how much money is in that house right now.
Yeah, so true.
Cool.
So true.
Well, I mean, I pretty much finished up your point for you. I think we can wrap it up here, guys, because it's coming up on time. We'll let everyone go. I can stay on a bit longer if you want to chat, but if you've got to go somewhere, then you can jump off because this is quite an interesting discussion. I could probably keep going for a little bit.
Definitely.
Michael can finish all your points for you guys.
Yeah, I know.
Just go another 20-minute solo rant before I wrap up the time. Yeah. No, I definitely want to. I'm going to stay on the line a little bit longer, and we can keep recording. But if you got to jump, that's totally fine. Been a really good discussion, chap. So appreciate all your input. And crypto is one of those things I can talk about forever. So.
I know, right? No worries. Well, good to see you guys.
Cool. All right. Ciao, Moritz. See you, Lynn.
Ariel,
whoever's left, we'll see.
He's frozen again. For God's sakes.
It's just that cheesy
pose.
It's a great thumbnail as well with that laugh.
All right. Well, I think he's dropped off, so I'm going to wrap up here as well then, and we'll catch you guys on Thursday. Yeah.
See you Thursday. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, then. Bye.